to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. But let's do something a little bit different for today. Because after all, this is in fact only number 7 in the entire series. I've mostly talked about films that were only a few years old at this point in time, including, well, yesterday I talked about Togo, which came out nearly 2 years ago, and I've also talked about the first Suicide Squad film, which, again, it's still fresh in people's minds because there's going to be a sequel coming soon. Let's do something different for today. Let's talk about something that actually came out quite a bit more recently. Again, like I've said, Togo is a bit recent in comparison to most of the others I've already discussed, but Greenland is actually one of those that I probably should have talked about when it first came out. And I'll tell you that there are going to be a lot of films out there that came out in more recent times that I'll also want to have a chance to talk about. And I'm not so very sure about films that are going to be completely fresh in people's minds, ones that will be out way too recently. But when the time does come, I might want to talk about a couple that are in fact brand new to American cinema and beyond. Greenland, however, is one that came out not even a whole year ago. So, you know what? I bet the topic is still fresh in some people's minds right now. I know it's fresh in my mind because I actually watched it a little while ago, and I still remember so many of those tiny little details that are present in there, plus a few Easter eggs. So you're getting yourself quite a big review from myself. So let's get started right here. Greenland is one of those apocalypse sort of films out there. And apocalypse happens to be such a cliche word that does describe the majority of the plots that are taken in a lot of different notable films out there. If you've seen movies like Armageddon, 2012, or even Geostorm, then well, let's take a look at Greenland here. This one actually does not really do a whole lot of the same sort of, well, apocalyptic sort of event craziness that typically takes place, but this one actually does center around the drama that would typically take place whenever a natural disaster comes around. The plot line centers around a family who has a diabetic child, and they get home to realize that they're being selected for a take by the President of America to be a part of a doomsday bunker session. And what happens from then on out is just absolutely insane. Because, well, looking at it in most ways, you would think that there would be something that's very surprising in there, but then realize that maybe nothing too serious is going to come about. But then, well, right before you know it, all 3 members of the family, of the main cast, which includes actor Gerard Butler, who was also present in Angel Has Fallen, and Geostorm. I tell you, Butler's like your quintessential actor to use in apocalypse or military-based movies out there during this time period. Well, one of a few that we know of today. But what happens is that the television broadcasts a private message sent to their phones telling them that they have been selected by the president to be a part of a doomsday bunker that has been specialized for an asteroid strike. And let me tell you, when it comes to this particular asteroid strike in this instance, it is crazy. Whoever was in charge of the special effects department in there, mostly at a visual level, must have done such an amazing job replicating a possible realistic explosion that takes place when an asteroid impact happens. Because what does happen is that, well, in the state of Florida, the asteroid strike does take place, and it is a massive size with a gigantic explosive shockwave. It takes out most of the news that are covering the story, which only leads to disaster. Disaster, of course, that starts with the shockwave ripping through the states that, well, get away from ground zero. And from then on out, we are to expect a lot of things to happen around here. There's lots of drama, there's lots of violence, there's lots of realistic satire that, well, actually is appropriate given to the fact that there were tons of real-life events that had taken place very similar to this. The only real difference is that within the last 2 years or so is because of a viral outbreak and not from an asteroid strike. That's the main difference that surrounds both real life and, well, fiction that happens within this film. But anyways, as time goes on, Greenland shows to be quite a gigantic endeavor where the family tries their best to survive. They try to get on board planes that will take them to, well, the bunker, and of course that does not end up happening correctly, but eventually it gets even bigger than you'd possibly expect. Riots break out in the airport where the family's supposed to be at in order to get to the bunker, and then lots of other things take place. Looters, shootouts, and then of course there's the kidnapping of the child actor. Man, that is freaking insane. And then of course you really just gotta love that sort of acting that takes place. Where Greenland, of course, happens to situate itself on how the bunker is set up and where it is set up. Eventually it is figured out that it is nowhere else other than Greenland. That seems to be the only big clue why the bunker is over there. The clue to where the people are supposed to go during the doomsday, apparently, is in Greenland. I feel like that's how they came up with the title. And more importantly, I feel like that's just not as much of a challenge to figure out because, well, truth be told, I have watched the film only once so far. And, well, now I do know that, well, Greenland happens to be the name of the place where the ultimate doomsday bunker is set up, where everybody can pretty much survive an extinction level event. So, of course, in the end, all the characters managed to survive, with the exception of a few antagonists, and they managed to pretty much survive an extinction level event, similar to the one that wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So, when you really think about it, this is one of those attempts to pretty much replicate on how doomsday probably won't really mean the end of all humanity, but it turns out that, well, Greenland does show how it can ultimately be done. So, being a more modernized take on a typical natural disaster sort of event, being really turned into such an incredible satire, I ultimately won't really recommend it for everybody out there because, man, it is brutal. It is serious right there. It has as dark of a tone as you could probably expect. Probably very similar in ways to how The Dark Knight in 2008 has been treated. And then, of course, you have to really appreciate the many other aspects that lie within. When it comes to ranking Greenland based on a KFN official score, it's a bit hard, especially for my tastes. But because it's still fresh in my mind, I still remember a lot of details, including how, well, the characters have to go over to a grocery store that's being looted in order to get some more diabetes medicine and all that. And plenty of other things that I would go into detail about. But again, in terms of, well, ranking it by a score of any sorts, I'm going to have to give this a 7.5 out of 10. So, the thing is, it's just amazing. The effects, satire, and overall action and drama are pretty well played. By this point in time, we'd probably expect a lot of movies to turn out to be crap, but this one actually does seem to be one of the only leading exceptions. That may just be proof that we might just have a chance at having good movies again. Being a 2020 release, there were definitely lots of problems going on in terms of getting this thing released, but I feel like that it was released appropriately. Having it released now would have made a lot of other problems because, well, that's just what this whole year has been about. But I am going to be talking about some other titles that may not always have this sort of flair to it. So I will have something new for tomorrow. Maybe it will be something bad, or even something else that's also good, but if you want to see more, go down to my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.